The first Jason, fuel ship, later Ac-12, was a collier of the United States Navy. She was laid down March 26, 1912 and launched November 16, 1912 by Maryland Steel Company, Sparrows Point, Maryland.On on the morning of March 7, 1913 in Baltimore Harbor. 300 tons of dynamite bound for use in constructing the Panama Canal was being loaded onto the British iron steamer Alum Chine from an adjacent car float when it detonated, completely annihilating both vessels. Jason, about 1,100 feet away and newly ready for sea trials, was blasted by the debris and showered with iron, timber, and boxes of dynamite, some of which exploded on impact. At least 3 on Jason were killed, and many more wounded. The ship's master at the time, Captain J.R. Thompson, on deck making preparations to leave, was knocked head over heels and nearly blown overboard. Jason's hull and plating, 3/4 to 7/8 of an inch thick, was riddled with holes from the water line to the top of the smokestacks, which were mashed almost flat by the force of the explosion. Jason was so badly battered by the explosion she required extensive repairs before she would be accepted by the Navy. As a result, she was not commissioned until June 26, 1913. Captain A.M. Wiggin in command. During Woodrow Wilson's first administration, Mexico was torn by revolution and several factions struggled to attain undisputed control of the land. Jason sailed for the troubled area September 4, 1913 to fuel American ships stationed there. She returned to Norfolk October 13 to prepare for fueling operations in the Mediterranean. Jason departed Norfolk October 25, fueled ships off Italy and France, and returned to Hampton Roads, Virginia, December 18. Following further fueling duties during winter maneuvers in the Caribbean and Mexican waters in early 1914, she embarked refugees from Tuxpan, Mexico, in April and transported them to Louisiana. Later that year, Jason was once again involved in a humanitarian gesture as she sailed from New York November 14, bearing Christmas gifts for the Mediterranean fleet and the people of Europe. The Christmas ship, as she was called, returned to Norfolk March 15, 1915. For the next 2 years Jason continued fueling operations, including one cruise to the West Coast March-June 1915. During the early months of the war she operated with the Atlantic train, transporting coal, stores, and freight along the eastern United States. She continued these duties until April 16, 1918 when she arrived in New York to load aviation materials for transportation to Inverness, Scotland. Upon her return to Hampton Roads July 5, Jason was assigned to Knots to transport coal along the East Coast. After the war, the fuel ship made 2 cruises to Europe with coal and general cargo before being detached from Knots July 22, 1919. Jason sailed from Norfolk July 31 to join the Pacific train, having been reclassified Ac-12 on July 17, 1920. 6 months later she returned to the East Coast and September 21, 1920 sailed with coal and stores for the ships in European waters. Upon returning to the United States, she loaded airplanes and artillery equipment and departed Philadelphia January 24, 1921 for Guam. Jason operated in the Pacific for 2 years performing fueling operations along the coast. During 1923 she cruised to Nicaragua, embarked Marines stationed there, and returned them to Norfolk. She arrived San Diego May 5 and resumed transport and fueling services until 1925. She also transported a load of Douglas DT-2 torpedo bomber floatplanes to Pearl Harbor during July 1923. Jason departed Pearl Harbor May 2, 1925 for service with the Air Squadron in the Far East as the official depot ship for the aircraft of the Asiatic Fleet, since the naval treaties forbade basing aircraft ashore in the Philippines. After arriving in the Philippines May 25, she carried Marines to China to protect American interests. From 1925 to 1932 Jason operated in the Far East, engaging in transport duties and acting as a floating base supporting the Asiatic Fleet's Air Squadron. As an aside, the 1922 Washington Treaty and the associated Four-Power Treaty forbade the establishment of permanent air facilities ashore in the Philippines, and Jason was assigned to replace Ajax as the depot ship in the Philippines for American naval aviation in the islands, basing the 6SC-2 and the later T-3M2 seaplane torpedo bombers and VT-5A, originally established as VT-20, and the 602U-1 seaplane scouts of VS-8A, Asiatic Fleet detachments. Peace in China was constantly jeopardized by warlike factions within and aggression from without. Jason and the other members of the Asiatic Fleet kept the situation in hand by making the presence of America's naval strength felt. Jason was reclassified AV2 on January 21, 1930. She returned to San Diego on May 13, 1932, and was decommissioned at Bremerton Navy Yard June 30, 1932. Jason was struck from the Navy list May 19, 1936 and sold July 29 of that year. She was converted to a commercial bulk carrier and was photographed in 1943,